Hi Ben, thanks for coming on today.
Pleasure, Nick. Great to be here. It's been a while in the making, hasn't it?
We first talked about this a little while back. Yeah. So as we tend to do on this, let's start at the start. So young Ben joins the Marines. How did that come about?
So it wasn't actually quite so young, Ben. I was 20, just before my 23rd birthday when I joined up eventually. So previous to that, I went to uni, did an engineering degree, dropped out, ended up bumming around for a few years doing like door work and travelled around with a bunch of druggy marquee erectors for a summer, usual stuff. But my intention had always been to join the Corps. So finally pulled my finger out just before I was 23 and joined up.
So how did you find that? Because I mean, it's much more normal that people are joining in the sort of 16, 17, 18, 19 kind of age. So were you one of the older guys on in your intake?
I guess I was definitely towards the older end. There was a 25-year-old, even a 27-year-old. That was, I think, the upper cutoff in those days was 27, I think, and he was like right at the top. But yeah, I would guess the majority there. We had a couple of 16-year-olds. Most of the guys were probably post A level or sort of 18, 19.
Yeah.
Was probably the age. So yeah, there was me and a few others that were in our sort of mid-20s. Yeah.
It's a cheeky little course to there's your introduction to military life. So, and how did you find it when you turned up?
So it was. It wasn't actually my complete introduction to military life because while I was at uni before I dropped out, I was in the OTC. So I'd done some, basically grown up cadets,
Yeah,
technically part of the TA. But yeah, you swiftly learn not to mention that when you join Livingston. So yeah, it was okay. I guess it's one of those things. I think everyone comes to a point where they think, "Is this for me?" And then I remember exactly when my point was. It was probably about week, yeah, midway through. Sat in a puddle, like sand everywhere, dirty weapon, no way to clean it, getting absolutely thrashed. And it was just like, well, I'm here. I just need to put my head down and do it, and that's pretty much how it unfolded, I suppose.
yeah. So, yeah, I think everyone goes through that. What am I doing? Moment when
Yeah,
when you're just tired, cold, wet.
yeah. It's funny actually. I'm connected to one of my training team on LinkedIn just recently, and he's now working for a construction company. And he posted a motivational. I took a bunch of people for a wander around the hills, and there was a picture of a waterfall in it. I was like, "What? You didn't make them do press ups in the waterfall? What the hell? Are you slipping?"
So then you got through training, no issues, and
Yep.
then where'd you go after that?
So I went to 4-2 Commando down in Plymouth. Did a Sierra Leone tour with them and a Northern Ireland tour. Um,
So
and when I
that's
came back,
90s for Sierra Leone.
no, it was 2001. I went, so it was properly horrible in 2000 while I was still in training, and then 2001 it had calmed down quite a lot, and I did I think 3 month rotation through there with it was just a company of 4-2 Commando at that point.
So
Um,
you
yeah,
pretty fresh out of training at that point.
yeah, I guess I'd done. So I did training, and then I did signals training, and joined 4-2 in what that would have been probably April, May, and then I think I went out there from memory like September, something like that. So
Okay,
yeah,
yeah, it's
fairly new.
pretty fresh, yeah.
Yeah,
And how did you find that?
it was okay. I mean, it was actually it was September because it was just after 9/11. It was a few weeks after 9/11. So, I mean, Sierra Leone had calmed down quite a lot by then. I had guys that had been out there, you know, 6 months or a year back, and they were, you know, watching people get killed from their observation posts and stuff. And it was a lot less kinetic when we were there. It's actually, once you get out of Freetown, Sierra Leone was actually really beautiful. So we were, able to go and visit some of the beaches down south. Yeah, it was really nice. Well,
Right.
nice is probably
Yeah.
not the right word, but yeah, comparative to how it might have been if I was there a year before,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah,
good.
I get what you mean. And so where else? And Northern Ireland as well.
I did a 6 month tour of South Armagh as well. Yeah.
How was that?
Again, like it was towards the end of, they were starting to take down the observation towers. I don't think we had any major incidents apart from, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a helicopter that crashed on Sugarloaf Mountain in 2001, 2002. Yeah, and that was literally like 3 days or so after we took over the AO. So the helicopter crashed, and no fatalities, I don't think, from memory, but I think that was about the only major incident, and the rest of it was just standard kind of stag on, 12 hours on, 12 hours off.
Yeah. So then, I'm not quite sure. Is it similar in the Marines to like in some of the units in the Army where you'll post around, or do you stay with the same?
Yeah,
same
in the Marines,
time?
it's like 18-month drafts
Okay.
around the place. Yeah.
So then, where did you go after 4-2?
So I ended up at CHF, Commando Helicopter Force, after 4-2. But actually, there's a quite a key part to my story at 4-2. When I came back from Sierra Leone, I bought a laptop, thinking I'm going to teach myself how to use computers and stuff, because all the comms kit that we had was absolute garbage, and wasn't any IT as such involved. So I wanted to kind of learn how to use computers. And I had a mate who is now a very high level Cisco engineer, who, in fact, there was two guys in my accommodation who were into Linux. They had like Linux magazines and CDs. And he was like, "Oh, you don't want to have Windows on that. You want to learn how to use computers. You need to learn how to use Linux. I can install it for you." He got halfway through installing it for me and completely bricked my brand new laptop. So I had to spend the next, I don't know, it must have been weeks on watch in the ComCen on night duty with my dial-up internet, because it was the only place on camp that had internet access, I think, back then. So I literally spent weeks of night shifts. I was volunteering for night shifts so I could like learn how to use Linux and get this laptop fixed. But that's like the start of the journey, I suppose.
Wow. Yeah. There's no better way to learn than break something.
No, absolutely, yeah. Or break somebody else's something is even more safe. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And what would I mean? Because right, we're talking early 2000s. So this was like end of Klansman, beginning of Bowman.
Yeah, we were still on Klansman. Yeah, yeah, absolute garbage, embarrassingly bad, really, when you think back.
Yeah. I remember it well.
Yeah.
So yeah, had you always had a bit of a interest in technology? I mean, so engineering degree. So yeah, you've got that like to know how things work kind of mindset.
Yeah, I guess. So I did physics and maths at A level, which I quite enjoyed. Did some very, very basic kind of engineering type programming at uni, but didn't really click with me. But yeah, I guess I've always had that figure it out mindset, I suppose, which helps with those types of things. Yeah.
So, but bunch of night shifts, and you got your laptop working on Linux.
Yep.
Good stuff.
There was dual boot, Windows, and God, Red Hat. I don't know, a version of Red Hat early enough that it came on a single CD in a magazine, basically.
Wow. Okay. So then, I take it then this stays as a theme that you keep learning more about programming and
Yeah.
how computers work and all that during the rest of your career.
Yeah, pretty much. So I getting into the kind of Linux community and interacting with people as I was learning how to fix this thing. Eventually, I kind of stumbled on Eric S. Raymond's paper, How to Become a Hacker, which is not a hacker in the breaking into computer sense, a hacker in the build shit, build stuff sense. So that led me on to, I think the recommendation in that paper at the time was this language called Python, which is, a bit easier to pick up, a little bit simpler. And so I was kind of teed up for a very long voyage on a ship on the way to Iraq in 2003. Not much to do, a Linux laptop and a Python interpreter. So I bought myself a book on Python and basically got my head down on the way to Iraq.
Python is a great skill to have. because you can do
Yeah.
almost limitless things with it.
Yeah, it's definitely become the lingua franca of data analysis, and I ended up kind of blagging my way. This is a bit of a theme of a career as well. Blagging my way into a job in a hedge fund, and Python was all the data scientists were using it there was kind of taking over from R. And I think now in today's world of AI and whatnot, all the AI, all the prominent AI agent frameworks are based on Python. Most of the tooling's based on Python. Lots of the data analysis and kind of research is based on Python.
So you started playing with Python 20 years ago?
I guess, got it. When you say it like that, it's wow. That's a slap in the face. Yeah, 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's a lot of experience with that.
Well, so funnily enough, so after I left the Corps, I ended up learning a bit of web programming using a framework called Django, which is a Python framework, and that's the thing that actually got me my first professional job, and it was also the reason that somebody without any formal education managed to go and work with a bunch of PhDs in a hedge fund, because they had this web app that they were trying to build in Django. But I slowly moved away from Python as my kind of daily driver probably 10 years ago. No, more than that, probably 12 years ago. For a number of reasons, depending on how nerdy you want this to be, I can get into, or we can just slowly push that onto the side.
Well, let's get back to your time in the Corps, and then we'll come around to what happened afterwards.
Cool. Sounds
good. So after your second posting, what's gone on there?
So CHF did a couple of trips to Norway, Bardufoss winters with the Navy squadron. So it was like Norway, all the fun of Norway and none of the thrashing that you would have had if it was a bootneck unit. So it was, good in that sense. Really enjoyed Norway. So the job as a CHF signaller is, you do all your stuff around camp, but you're also doing all of the load lifting training for the helicopter pilots.
Okay.
So we would basically take a BV, 2 people, and we drive it up into the mountains, some really picturesque kind of view over Bardufoss, and that area of Norway is absolutely clear and still most of the time. So you'd basically be sitting up on a mountain all day, waiting for a helicopter to fly in, clip the load on or unclip it. And at night you would be doing that, except with the northern lights over the top of you. So it was pretty epic draft, actually.
That does sound quite amazing.
Yeah,
I'm going to Norway for the first time in June with some friends. I'm going to play golf at Lofoten Island.
Nice.
Just up in the Arctic Circle. So I'm quite excited. 24-hour daylight when we're up there. So that should be quite funky.
Yeah, Norway's quite a scene when the sun finally breaks over the horizon after three months or so. It's quite a party town or party country. I suppose.
You'd have done the 24-hour darkness.
It wasn't quite 24, but because it wasn't ever dark, fully dark, but the sun never came over the horizon, so it was kind of twilight days, and I think started getting light probably about 10 in the morning, and then getting dark at 3 in the afternoon or something like that.
Wow.
So yeah, there was a bit of light, but it was like you have a bit of sunrise and then dark again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I've never experienced that. I imagine it's quite surreal almost.
It's a bit weird, yeah. It kind of, you just don't see the sun for months on end, which is a bit weird if you're not used to it, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as part of like being in the military, though, isn't it? You get to go and see and do stuff that is outside of the norm to, your average person living in the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. Sounds like that was a nice little.
It was good. It was good. And then in between the two Norways, obviously, was Optelic 1, which is where I was embarked with the helicopters on HMS Ocean, off to the Al4 invasion, and then back with HMS Ocean by sea as well.
And so that was all studying on the laptop there and back?
Pretty much. I remember it more on the way there, but I think I must have done a load on the way back as well.
Was this
Yeah.
was this an intentional setting yourself up for life after the Corps, or was it just driven by curiosity?
So when I was in Northern Ireland, I applied to be a helicopter pilot. So I applied to cross over into the Navy and do the commission thing. Passed all the flight aptitude tests and all of the tests that they put you through, and then failed the AIB, Admiralty Interview Board. So I missed out on that by a whisker. And now, when did I would have put my chit in September when I came back from Iraq. So I was, when I didn't get through to helicopter pilot, I was kind of thinking, well, where does that take me as a career in the Marines? And, I just didn't really fancy years of working with crappy comms kit, going up as a, corporal and sergeant. So I'd kind of figured, it probably wasn't going to be my long-term career.
Yeah.
At which point the mental maths is, well, do a few years and get a bit more experience and have a bit more fun. If I was a bit younger, maybe that's the decision I would have taken. But, a good friend of mine was on the first helicopter that went in in the early hours of Optelic. And I could see, the way our response to 9/11 was going, it was going to be, back-to-back Iraq and Afghanistan tours. I didn't really agree with our direction in those two conflicts. So I guess all of that kind of added up to, I probably need a skill. I probably need to think about what I do next. So yeah, it wasn't, I definitely want to be a programmer, therefore I need to sit down and do this 8 hours a day. It was like, I'm really interested in this, and the Marines is probably not going to be something that keeps me for that much longer.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. That seems sensible.
Yep.
So how old were you when you were leaving?
27.
Okay. And so I think, yeah, we've just covered there the sort of reason for leaving. Didn't get the helicopter pilot thing. Couldn't see a long-term position for yourself. So when you put your chit in, was the intention at that point, right, I'm going to go and work in tech?
Not really, because I guess I didn't really know what working in tech would entail. Okay. So my intention was to go into telecoms. Right. So I did a conversion course into 3G telecoms, and that, if anything, that solidified my absolute kind of disgust with the level of comms kit that we had. I was doing this course on 3G comms and 4G and what digital comms look like and all that, and the fact that I was using 50-year-old analog radios, HF, when and there was an incident in Iraq actually it was in Saudi. In the preparation for Iraq, we had some Navy SEALs attached to us for the L4 insertion, and I'd been, me and my SIGSDET had been in the desert for 3 days, basically twiddling antenna lengths and putting up masts and moving them around. Yeah, pretty threaders at that point, because we were only trying to get comms with a ship that was 50 kilometers away, and it was just like fucking joke, really. And then literally a few hours before the op kicked off, the Navy SEALs rocked up, and my opposite number in the SEALs jumped out of his cab, reversed his truck up to next to our CP tent, jumped out of his cab, pressed a button, up went a hydraulic mast, he picked up his handset and he had comms instantly. I was like, right, that's it. I'm done. I'm done with this bullshit.
Yeah.
And then, and then I went and did this 3G comms course, and I found out what was actually possible with radios yeah. and digitization and whatnot. And I was just like, what the hell? And I'd seen some of the kind of procurement process within CHF when we had a bit of kit to test, and it was just everything about that was broken. And obviously, if you're still using 50-year-old radios, yeah. That was 20 years ago. I would imagine that the gap between you look at what Ukrainians are doing with AI and drones, completely kind of bottom up driven in Ukraine at the moment, versus our kind of top down archaic procurement process that necessitates spending hundreds of millions to get anything useful. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't know about all that kind of stuff then, but I was pretty disillusioned with the whole thing, I guess.
Yeah. So I was signals platoon in the Irish Guards, and then I transferred across to the Royal Signals, thinking, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna get onto the bleeding edge
Now I'm
of
going to see the Gucci
communications there." And my first posting, I ended up fixing Klansmen.
Jeez.
It's like, what's gone on? Yeah,
Fixing Klansmen, you mean holding it about 4 feet above the ground and dropping it? That's how you
we were
fix
taking them
Klansmen,
apart.
Ah, right.
Like we had it was a Pucker radio workshop, and like we were in there with like Pucker test equipment and finding out where signals were failing, and it was but it was the realization that we were just working on archaic kit. Like,
Yeah.
wow.
Crazy, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's even more crazy when you think about what it's possible for the armed forces to go out and achieve as a group of people with that level of gap between what they should have kit-wise and what they do have kit-wise.
Yeah. Okay, so we've made the decision. You've put the you put your chit in. Is it 12 months notice in the Marines?
12 months, yeah. I don't know if it still is, but it was then.
What did you spend your year doing?
So we did another Norway. That was the second Norway. And it wasn't much else, really. It was all kind of, just around Yeovilton. I don't think we didn't go away anywhere. We did a few exercises, all pretty routine, standard stuff, I think, from memory.
And then just carrying on learning what you could.
Yeah, learning what I could. Did my resettlement course, obviously, and then punched out in September.
And when did you start looking at jobs?
About 2 weeks before I left, probably. I was a bit laissez-faire about the whole thing. So I ended up finding a contract. It was an EPOS swap-out contract, traveling around the south coast, like swapping out EPOS machines in a supermarket. And then very quickly found a job in Kinetic, which was basically
like NCR or something like that.
It was, I can't even remember. It might have been, yeah. Might have been. And then from there ended up at Kinetic. So that only lasted a few weeks, actually. And then this job came up at Kinetic, basically doing an IT swap out. So it was, are you security cleared and do you have a pulse and can you unplug wires and plug wires back in? Got the job. A few other bootnecks on that one, funnily enough. So that was a few months, and I was kind of looking for, how do I get into kind of telecommunications? And there was a company still around, actually, I think, called Genesis, and they had the contract for running the NOC for 3 in Reading. So as I'd done a kind of 3G comms course, I got a job as a first line support engineer there. So again, watch on, watch off. But Genesis was good because they had a bunch of contracts all over the place. So, I ended up going for a short-term kind of project in Singapore, and then one in Malaysia, and then ended up moving out to New Zealand with them as well. And
wow,
that was good.
How long did you go out there for?
18 months altogether. So the first 9 months of that was with the UK company, and then I swapped over and worked for a Kiwi field services company. So my third or fourth job out of the Marines was I had a truck. I was based in Christchurch, and I used to drive all over the South Island fixing cell sites, and that was awesome. Just like, we've got a broken cell site in Tekapo, one of the most beautifully scenic drives in the world. Can you go and fix it? I'm like, yeah, sure. It'll take me a day. Drive down there, go and swap out a card, enjoy the view. So that was a great job.
Nice.
Yeah, and actually that's when I got into web programming, because this company had taken over the contract. Nobody actually knew where these cell sites were. So there was obviously that you've got your estate of cell sites, but we didn't get access to like a database of where they are and their coordinates and stuff. We got access to a 21 meg web file, HTML. And literally, if you got given a site to go look at, you would literally Control F this web file to find out where the damn thing was. which was great if the letter code was, ZXG or something. But if it was AND, you were kind of screwed. So that was my kind of next foray into Python, was basically parsing that HTML file, pulling out all the site locations, sticking it into a database, and putting a web front end on it using Django. So one of the benefits of this job I had in this field service.
Was that a your idea project, or was that something
definitely scratch my own itch side project for sure.
Okay.
But I had this job. I had 1 week where I only had one call out, so I had like literally 20 minutes of work for a full-time job, and the rest of my time was just banging away at figuring out Django and building this little kind of side project.
Nice. And then so when you'd done it, you sort of called your boss up and said, "Look, here's a problem I've fixed."
Yeah. And they said, "Oh, that's nice, but I don't think we really need it."
Really?
Yeah, I don't believe that company ended up having the contract for very long, funnily enough.
Wow.
But at that time, a guy that I had been in working in Genesis with, who I'd been working in Auckland with, had moved to Indonesia, and they were running. So the way it works with a 3G kind of network rollout is the company goes and sells all their kit to the operator, and they usually sell it with a managed service contract where they'll set up the NOC and run the network as well as kind of set it up. Nobody leaves any money in the contract for that bit, so they didn't have a means of procuring a trouble ticket system like what are the big ones called? I can't remember now.
ServiceNow or something.
Yeah, all those horrible kind of big enterprisey things that cost fortune. So they were again using a spreadsheet. So this guy phoned me up and was like, we just got chatting. He wanted some more bodies to come and work in Indonesia, and he got chatting about this issue that they had with not having a trouble ticket system. I was like, oh well, I've been learning a bit of web programming. I'll probably build you one in a few weeks. So I did over the course of Christmas. I built a really basic trouble ticket system, and then ended up basically having a job over there. Sold that to them, and had a job over there implementing it in the NOC. Classic kind of skin of the teeth IT project. It was all running on a laptop, not backed up. just sat there, don't unplug this laptop.
Yeah, a proper version 1.
Yeah.
Or an MVP, as people would now call it.
An MVP, yes. The very, very small V.
Wow, so that's cool. So then, did you move from New Zealand to Indonesia?
I moved from Christchurch, where a traffic jam is anytime you sit in a traffic lights and the red is, and you have more than 2 reds in a row, to Jakarta, where it's like one of the most congested cities in Southeast Asia. So that was a bit of a culture shock.
Yeah. And so, were you still a single man at this point, or were you dragging family around with you?
I was, yeah. Yeah.
You were dragging family around, or
No, I was single. So
right.
I met my wife to be in Indonesia, in Jakarta, actually.
Okay. So how long were you in Indonesia?
It was just under a year.
Okay. So was it basically you moved over there, got the knock up and working?
So I was basically paid as a consultant to do the kind of knock stuff. On the side, spun up this kind of software company, sold the first version of that to them as their trouble ticket system. And then towards the back end of that year, the work kind of dried up, and we were planning to come back to the UK for Christmas. And then when we did, and my wife, my girlfriend was now my wife and pregnant at that point. So I came back and I started calling around companies over Christmas to see if I could get a job as a programmer. And I ended up coming across this startup in Oxford that needed a Django programmer, and came across fairly well on the interview, I suppose. And yeah, that was my first foray into professional programming at 2008.
So, and how did you find that? Because I guess rather than delivering against any sort of like delivery framework, you'd have just been doing things in a way that made sense to you.
Yep.
How was that transition?
So it was a pretty I'm just trying to think. So I think they'd had the original version of this software built by an agency, and they'd taken it on board not that long previously. And the stuff that I'd been doing, just part of my kind of ongoing education in Python, as I'd really dug very deep into the guts of this web framework Django and how it worked. So I knew how Django worked inside and out at that point, and they really needed somebody that could come on and understand what they had and continue to ship features. But it wasn't like a strict kind of agile process. It was much more organic than that. So it was actually quite a nice landing point, I think, as a first job.
Okay, yeah, nice. So how long did you stay there?
God, how long would that be? It was probably just over a year, I think. So okay. Yeah, I mean, it was a small team. It was a product that was really something that backed to service rather than the product itself. It was the main effort. So it was a network, and I was casting around for what to do next. And obviously, you're in Oxford, you do Python. Going into London, working finance is where the money is. So I was kind of continually looking for opportunities to make the jump into contracting, and did a bunch of interviews and ended up coming across this hedge fund in quite a large algorithmic hedge fund, and they were porting some horrible Oracle Forms thing over to Django. And the very specific problem that they had was they needed to talk to more than one database, which at the time Django didn't do. And at the time, I knew how to hack the internals of Django to make it do it. And so that was pretty much, it was interesting, my first kind of real interview process where having bootneck on the CV kind of got it a bit of interest value and probably bumped it a few items up the pile than it really should have been. But then it turned out that I had exactly the experience that they needed to get this specific thing done.
Yeah, that can be the difficulty. Like when you're hiring people, that actually the right person can be hidden in a whole bunch of CVs.
I mean, I think the tech hiring process is completely bonkers. So this exact same hedge fund, they offered me a permanent job at the end of my year's contract. Really wanted me to stick around, and I, felt that it was probably better for me to become more rounded. So I ended up working at an investment bank and doing a bunch of other stuff. And then a couple of years later, there was another contract came up with them. It wasn't to work on kind of algorithmic stuff. It was, business apps, data, moving data around, exactly the stuff I was pretty good at. And I went and I had to go through the whole interview process again, even though somebody who'd given me a glowing recommendation before was still there, even though the CTO who had offered me a permanent job was still there. I still had to go through the rigmarole of doing an on-paper Python coding exercise with two graduates who were still at university when I'd actually worked at this place previously. And I failed the interview. And It's just like, that is what tech interviewing is like, right? Your big companies like, Google, Facebook, all these, that they have such a structured process that I've literally got a book on my shelf, Cracking the Coding Interview. So, you learn enough about these types of data structures and these types of problems and, kind of wanky math exercises that don't really have any bearing in reality. And that's what gets you a job. And meanwhile, you've got hundreds of thousands of self-taught programmers out there who can do an absolutely amazing job, who would never get a look in at places like this. It's bonkers. But it's good. I mean, it's good for the likes of you and me who want to find talented people to hire.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gone from the hedge fund to the investment bank. Are you starting to get the itch that you want to have your own company at this stage?
No, I was pretty happy contracting. And this investment bank, so my second kid came along at this point, and this investment bank actually let me go while I was on paternity leave, which was really good of them. And get away with that as a contractor. Yeah, that was a bonkers project. I won't bother boring you with it, but it was quite interesting what that was my first kind of view of the kind of nonsense that goes on in really big established businesses and the absolute waste that happens internally.
Yeah.
So anyway, after that, I got an opportunity to go and be, engineer number one at a startup hedge fund, algorithmic hedge fund, and I built the guts of their algorithmic trading system. So all of the kind of scheduling engine and how trades get kicked off, and then the signals that you get from the market, and pumping those into the execution engine, and then executing the code, and then taking that executed trade and allocating it to the different accounts. So that was a really great job to have. And it was really the start of my kind of journey into an area of programming called functional programming. So I started thinking I'd been reading up a lot of stuff about different architecture patterns, and I was really now starting to think in terms of event-based program design and asynchronous distributed systems design. So yeah, that was a really, I guess, pretty pivotal role for me, actually.
So how long did you spend doing that?
So that was an interesting one. I probably spent about 18 months there because, it was a startup. It was a hedge fund. They were going to make loads of money, and, there was going to be equity, we were told. And it turned out that the beginning of 2010, end of 2010, beginning of 2011 was the worst market in 30 years to launch an algorithmic hedge fund into. So they didn't make as much money as they thought. And then it turned out that their proposed equity thing was actually more like a point system. And, you could build up equity, but it wasn't real equity. And if you left and they decided you were ever in competition with them, they could take it all away. So it was totally not something worth spending, 10 years contributing to someone else's wealth. So I got another opportunity to go contracting again, and I took it.
Yeah. Contracting can be a very, very tempting path, kind of.
Yeah.
It's because you tend to be working on shiny things, and you tend to be quite well paid.
Yeah. Yeah, unless you go contracting in an investment bank, which is what I did, and then you're working on not very nice things, but there's loads of you. So yeah, the finance scene in investment banks, there's been this guy, it's literally one guy, who invented something at Goldman, then he kind of re-implemented it at JP Morgan, and then he re-implemented it at Bank of America, and it's got progressively shitter each time he's done it. And now they are like this kind of cancerous thing that sits in the middle of each of those banks that everyone has to use, and it's not pretty, not a great position for them to be in.
Wow. So then you've gone contracting again. What are you up to now?
So I was at Bank of America. I spent probably about 6 months there working on FX options, and then I got the opportunity to go and be developer number one at a startup using this functional programming style of building an architecture. And that was an amazing year. That was, I pulled together a team of my first time leading a team. First time when I was really starting to see the links between military doctrine and leading a team and doing strategy and doing architecture. And, first time putting together a team around this very niche functional programming language called Haskell. And we built a really, really solid technical solution that was probably the wrong level of solid for the level of business that we were working in. So that was also a lesson as well.
Yeah, the path tends to be full of lessons about too much, too little.
Yeah.
Not yet, too late.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So did that company succeed?
Yeah, I mean they're still going. They didn't succeed in the startup was supposed to be the Uber of time slots, right? So Pilates, yoga, all the kind of middle class kind of activities that people want to do that are sold by the hour. We wanted to be the platform where you could, travel to New York or London or wherever, and you could find the type of Pilates that you wanted or the yoga class that you wanted, and you could just book in and go and do it. But to do that, we had to have a way of digitizing all of that content. It had to be a way of getting that onto the platform. So what we actually built first was a gym booking system. And we built this gym booking system that was underpinned with these really elegant kind of platform primitives so that we could then build the ultimate platform later on. But I think, we either ran out of money or I don't know exactly what happened commercially. But as far as I know, that piece of software is still running the online bookings for several companies, including if you go and book a yoga class in a Sweaty Betty shop, you'll be using this software.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see it's still there. I mean, I don't how much of the code that I was in charge of, 12 years ago still remains is probably not very much, but
it'll either be almost all of it or almost none of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
But so then, so you've done that, then contracting again?
So I was contracting while I was doing that, actually, funnily enough. It was, contract to potential hire. And then when the runway ran out, I ended up moving to the only bank that I'm aware of in the world that's heavily using functional programming, or Haskell at least. And that was a huge, huge eye-opener because I was at Bank of America. Sorry, I went to Bank of America briefly after this startup, went back to Bank of America and was working on a middle office project doing kind of risk aggregation. And I was a year on that project, and there was a team in London, a team in New York, huge burn rate, loads of time spent, very little progress. It was a standard kind of enterprise garbage fire project. We're agile, but anything but you know the score. And that project was basically to aggregate risk across a few different trading books. And I went to Standard Chartered, where they had a very similar setup to Bank of America, except it had all been built in Haskell. And at Standard Chartered, they had this amazing team full of PhDs and really shit hot computer science people. And the rest of the business was slightly less organized. So somebody stuck their hand up and said, "Oh, by the way, we need to be compliant with the Volcker rules in a few months." Volcker is I can't remember the exact details now, but it's basically a bunch of financial regulations that stop businesses trading internally.
Right.
So it's a bunch of, you measure your risk, you have a bunch of different kind of metrics and levels that need to be monitored, and any breaches need to be notified. So in terms of scope, it was actually much larger in scope than this Bank of America project that I'd been on, because you're actually running the risk, calculating the risk, and then doing the aggregation, and they were doing it across the whole business, the whole bank. So it's more complicated, bigger scope, and bear in mind that this team in Bank of America had been probably 10 million quid down the drain in 2 years. In Standard Chartered, where they'd taken a very different approach to technology, one guy did it in 12 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was, coming from this project that was similar, but I took over this project from this guy. So not only had one guy done it in 12 weeks, he was able to hand it over to me in 3 or 4 weeks and move on to other stuff. So that was a complete kind of, I'd already had a really good experience building a startup in this technology stack. And then I went and saw what it looked like in a mature code base and a mature ecosystem. And it was, revelatory, really.
Wow. So what year are we up to now?
That would have been 2015, I think.
Okay. So then what happens next?
So I spent a couple of years there, 2.5 years, I think, working on that project. And then I took over kind of the software build process for all of the middle office, or all of the front office, sorry. So the CI/CD pipeline, it's called. So continuous integration, continuous delivery, testing any new code, shipping it out to the different servers that run all these, user-facing business apps. And that was really good. And I guess at that point I was sort of starting to think about what comes next, and starting to become a little bit disillusioned with working on, a technical project, no matter how well set up and how good it is, only ever stands on the foundation of what the rest of the business is doing. And in almost all cases I'd experienced, the rest of the business was, poorly led, had a lack of strategy, not really able to kind of express what they were doing and why. And the operation side of things was almost always a garbage fire, like under-resourced, really bad data. And so I'd been kind of, I spent the first 10 years out of the Corps thinking, oh, that was a nice little diversion I did in my early 20s, and it's not really relevant now that I'm a, software engineer. And I guess over the course of kind of 2014, 2015, I started to do a bit of a 360 when, Team of Teams came out by Stan McChrystal, Turn the Ship Around by David Marquet, and Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And I'd already been making a lot of connections between the way things were done in the Corps and agility, like organizational agility. And these books kind of helped to crystallize some of that thinking. And so I started to look at more strategic kind of consulting as well as doing the technical stuff. And so, I ended up working in a few startups and a couple of cryptocurrency businesses. And I guess at the same time, kind of building the foundation of what has now become Mission Ctrl.
So let's talk about Mission Ctrl a little bit and what you're doing there.
So Mission Ctrl is it's a service where many businesses in this space are a product. We're very specifically still a service. I think there will be product later on, but essentially we help businesses make sense of all of that internal operational data. Over the course of the last 10 years or so, the number of internal software as a service or other apps in use by businesses is, it's gone exponential. The barrier to entry in building a new service means that more and more smaller and smaller things are in use to do, better and smaller jobs. So if you think about like a marketing stack, you might have used a CRM 5 years ago. Now you'll be using a CRM and a cold email outreach and a, social media thing and, an ads dashboard and all sorts. And the same across, finance and ops and all the other different parts of a business. And you've got the senior leadership team needing to sit in the middle of all that, trying to make sense of it all and figure out what the hell's going on and what should be invested in and, where should the business go. And that is the thing that is, I think, very, very under-resourced in most businesses. It's, people wait until they're 50 to 100 people to resource up some sort of internal ops or, digital ops or, operational engineering or whatever they call it. And by then, you've got everyone completely off piece just using spreadsheets to manage all the different parts of the business. And when you try and unpick all that, it's much, much harder than just building it right in the first place. So Mission Ctrl is a stack of technologies that can help you build it right in the first place as you scale at a price that's probably a lot more accessible than it would have been 5 years ago, right? It's, building custom software has always been extremely expensive. But now in the world where lots of these tech companies create open source software that you can kind of pull together to create a platform and do a minimal amount of programming on top of it, it's becoming a lot more tractable to actually apply that kind of engineering thinking to your internal ops, which is what we do.
And so who's your target market? Is it young companies?
Yeah, it's a young growing company. So I think from what I've seen over the years, the right time to start this kind of thing is probably when you go from basically section to troop size in terms of social complexity. So, roughly 10 to 15 people, you're going to start breaking apart into multiple different teams and multiple different specializations. You're going to start getting heads of X coming in to take over those functions. The temptation is to let those heads of X come in and build those functions out, which inevitably ends up meaning that you get silos, which is necessary in a way because it helps cut down the amount of communication that has to happen in between silos. But it becomes detrimental as those silos grow, because then, you need, as a business owner who wants to make decisions, you need data from all of these different silos, and it becomes inefficient to get that. So yeah, we think the point at where people should really start thinking about this is probably around the kind of 15 people mark. The point at when it really starts to hurt is probably around the sort of 50 to 75 people mark. And the point where people start doing something about it is usually the 100 people mark, at which point it's probably 10 times more expensive than it would have been just to do it in the first place on the way.
So how do people get in touch with you if they want to talk about if Mission Ctrl can help their business?
So it's Mission Ctrl, missionctrl.dev, and I'm Ben at, or on socials, I am at Commando Dev on both LinkedIn and Twitter.
I like that.
Yeah.
So one thing I like to ask people is, if you were going to give some advice to someone leaving the military, getting ready to transition into a post-military career, what advice would you give?
Whew, that is a big one, isn't it? So I would say, I did 45 interviews with veteran entrepreneurs last year, trying to pick apart what they were able to bring with them from their military career that helped them start a successful business. And the upshot of that was, anyone who served in the forces of any flavour has got a PhD in kind of managing uncertainty and just kind of going with the flow, and, faking it until they make it and figuring shit out as they go along. And that's the critical skill, not quite the right word, but, the critical experience that people in the military have that they don't realize they have. Because they don't realize that most civilian career paths do not give people access to that level of training and that level of experience. And in any kind of operational role, or starting your own business, that is absolute gold. And, people have that even if they've spent 3 or 4 years at the lowest rank possible, which is what I did basically. And I spent the first 10 years out of the Marines not appreciating what I had. So don't make the same mistake as me, right? Even if you go into something super technical and you're not working with any military people day to day, what you have in the military is a framework for dealing with and managing complexity that is incredibly valuable in Civvy Street.
Awesome. Ben, thank you very much for your time today. It's been
My pleasure.
really great talking to you.
Yeah, great. Great to be on. Thanks a lot.